Hello, everybody. Welcome to Furuya Uncorked. Joining us on this week's interview is Ariana Tsuchiya, the GromSomm.
What's up?
Kevin Toyama, the handsome.
Ooh.
I don't think so. More like lonesome. And I'm Chuck.
And Chuck.
For those of you who may not be familiar with Kevin, he is the wine cellar master at the great Halekulani Hotel down in Waikiki.
Iconic.
Back in the 80s, yeah, it was during my era when I used to work there, it was, the top-ranked hotel, not only in Hawaii, but in the Pacific Basin. So it's a hotel of great grandeur and style, and just, it looks pretty. You feel so comfortable at this hotel, and their standards are so high. Their fine dining restaurant, La Mer, was rated 5 diamonds or 5 stars. I don't know what the term is.
The Forbes rating, correct?
Yeah. And
Right.
so it was a top-rated restaurant in Hawaii and one of the top-rated restaurants in the world. And that's where Kevin is based out of, La Mer Restaurant, and he's as well as putting together the wine program. Before that, Kevin was also at the Ihilani Resort and Spa out in Ko'olina, which started off, their intention was to start off with $1 million wine cellar. So they had wines like 1955 Chateau Latour, wines just from way back when, and it was just an incredible collection. Kevin, aside from those wines, Kevin put together a wine list that was one of the best I've ever seen here in Hawaii. It had verticals of Penfolds Grange, and it had verticals of Domaine Tempier Bandol. So it was quite a wine list to behold. And, as you can see, both of those restaurants are fine dining. Before that, when I first met Kevin, he was one of the, important cogs of the Arfield Wine Company group, before they sold. Kevin oversaw a couple of their stores. And, as you know, Ariana, your father-in-law now, created quite a legacy of importing the finest cheeses, the finest cigars, the finest caviar, the finest smoked salmon, and of course the finest wines. He was a true leader and pioneer.
And apparently the finest people, right?
Yeah. And so Kevin was part of that strong group. And in addition to that, Kevin passed level 3, the advanced sommelier certificate, in 1993. So at that time, he was one of 16 Americans that had passed that level. So he decided not to continue with the studies. Family and whatnot comes into play, of course. But still, I just wanted to explain to everybody what level he plays on. It's of the highest level. So we thought it would be very important to talk story with Kevin in a very casual setting and, hear some of his thoughts of where he came from, what started him, all these different things, and how he thinks about constructing wine lists and in pursuit of enjoying wines. So, Kevin, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome. Well, something not casual, I think I want to emphasize what you said, Chuck. That's 16 people in all of the U.S., not out of just our state. He was one of 16 across the nation, right, Chuck? Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah, and so back then, man, I'm telling you, he was some kind of phenom. He did a wine and food pairing suggestion that Nunzio and I looked at each other, and the guy in the middle was from England, the famous Brian Julian, and Kevin did a pairing, and Nunzio and I looking at each other like, oh my God, he nailed it. And Brian was, I don't know if I like that wine. I was,
Kevin,
do
you remember
man.
that? Do you remember?
I do vaguely recall that.
Oh, okay.
So much pressure at the time. You've got 3 fabulous masters in front of you. The pressure's on, and you don't think. You just sort of
muscle
reach
memory
into that toolbox. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Kevin, so you started off at Arfield when it comes to wines, is that, or did you do wines before that?
No, that was actually my first job in the industry, working for Richard Field at the Arfield Wine Company. It's, it's sort of funny that my high school classmate, Tim Learmont, who was also in the program, he used to laugh at me. We used to go to the Waikiki Shell. I'd bring a bottle of wine.
You guys were high school classmates? I didn't know this.
I didn't know that either.
Michael refers to him as
right
Uncle Tim. That's so funny.
Yeah.
Uncle Tim and Uncle Kevin. I love it.
Yes. So he used to laugh. He used to make fun of me when I'd bring bottles of wine to the show when there were concerts. And, he had a change of career at a point. He went into the wine business and started working for Richard Field at the Arfield Wine Company. And, of course, I I had to poke fun of it at him. And right after I finished that, I was like, let me know when there's a job. And so, I started back then with Richard around maybe about the mid 80s. And, from there it sort of progressed. I mean, it's just a fascinating subject at the time because there was just so little information, and anything that you could glean and learn about wine was rewarding.
Mm-hmm. And at that point, were they just doing wine, or were they starting to do kind of caviar and things like that too?
Well, being from Kalihi, I had to work my way up.
Okay.
Richard actually started with a liquor store called The Still in Kaimuki, and I worked there, and we closed it up at a point. I moved over to the Arfield Wine Company, and at that point, that's when I really started to learn a lot. I mean, between Richard and his partner back then, Scott Shimomura. Scott was fantastic. He enjoyed wine, but at the same time, he was also like a food person. Where Richard was the great resource for wine, and it's interesting that Richard had a policy that you can call me anytime if you have a question.
Oh wow!
And on more than one occasion, we take him up on that. I mean, we'd be calling him at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning and asking Richard, we've tried this and this, what is it about this, and, he'd always be, whether we roused him from sleep or, whatever the case might be, he'd patiently, calmly answer our questions. And I think, in that respect, having a great teacher like Richard for wine, having someone like Scott who inspired me in terms of food, and sort of opened my eyes as to food was quite amazing. I mean, there was
Sandy wasn't part of that too?
I'm sorry?
Sandy.
Sandy might have been. I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Who's Sandy?
He's a guy that was a partner up there with Scott and Richard,
okay.
and he was also a big foodie.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what? So you mentioned the Still in Kaimuki, but there was also the Still in Kapahulu. When did that store open?
Oh gosh, I don't really remember. I mean, I got there in the mid 80s, and I think it probably was there from at least the early 80s.
Yeah. So the Still in Kapahulu, I think that was the second store. I think the one in Kaimuki was the first, the Still. But, you have to understand, let me explain this to you so you better grasp what we're talking about. So I remember walking into the Still in Kapahulu and seeing a bottle of 1975 Penfolds Grange Hermitage. It was called Grange
And this was
Hermitage.
a liquor store?
Well, they had quite a bit of wine section. The original Still had some wine, but not like Kapahulu. Kapahulu was wine-centric. And they had a 1975 Penfolds Grange Hermitage, which nobody in Hawaii would know that wine except for a wine geek like me. But Richard had that. And let me take this a step further. We talk about Kevin and Tim Learmont, who also, Tim advanced in 1991, Kevin passed in 93, but Dave Gocross passed in 1991. He's from that group. There's Marvin Chang, he passed in 1991. There is Randy Caporoso.
They all worked at
Caporoso was back there in the late 70s, early 80s, that he worked for Richard. So, and then there's also Roberto Virnes worked for Arfield Wine Company. So there's a lot of very prestigious, high-level wine people that came out of the Arfield Wine Company. That company was so progressive. I mean, Richard championed Krug Champagne and Kermit Lynch wines and all these boutique German wine producers, and Santa Barbara with Babcock and Aubon Clement and Cupé. I mean, Richard Field was way ahead of his time. Even cigars, you didn't have too many cigar stores back then. It was always, you wanted a good cigar, you go to Arfield Wine Company. I mean, he covered the whole gambit. I mean, I remember him bringing in this certain type of Scottish salmon. I don't know if you remember that. It was like crazy good. It was just crazy good. I mean, he's just that kind of person. So understand, Arfield Wine Company, with people like Kevin, Tim, and specifically Richard Field, they changed the game in Hawaii. They made all these really cool things accessible to everybody. It was really a cool time, and that's where I met Kevin.
So Kevin, you think about like wine gangs, like having that camaraderie. Was it ever competitive between you guys? Was it just pure like fun enjoyment? What was the feeling like?
It's a great question. I mean, back then, there was so little about wine. It was more about the camaraderie. It was more about finding people who wanted to learn,
like-minded.
Who had that hunger, who had that desire to learn. And I guess it wasn't, how should I put it, driven by ego. It was just more by pure pleasure and pure enjoyment.
Hanging out and talking story about wine. That's
And
what it was about. It
there
was really
wasn't
cool.
too many other wine stores at the time, or it was kind of there's a lot of people just getting to know each other, or what attracted you specifically to work at our field besides
Well,
Uncle Tim?
of course, I wanted to work with my best friend, my buddy Tim.
Oh, okay.
I mean, Vintage Wine Cellars is also a long-standing retailer in Hawaii.
And game-changing in its own way.
Yes, and there are a lot of great people that rolled out of that organization as well. I mean,
Later on was Fujioka's.
yes, right, absolutely.
So, I mean, you had these strong, strong retail markets that made wines available. And the thing about it is, it took a while because, a lot of the boutique and adventuresome wines were sold to tourists. So it was these more progressive retailers that made these wines available to the Hawaii public, and they had the staff to tell you why you should try this wine.
Well, my generation, I'm going to say thank you on behalf of us, because the reason why we get all the amazing wines that we do are partially because there were so many awesome stores back in the 80s that first went to go find them. Isn't that right, Chuck?
Yeah, so just to give you an idea that would ring true to you, someone just asked me a few days ago about the Whitcraft Pinot Noirs, right? But, I mean, his last vintage that he made himself, I think, was 06, Chris Whitcraft. They were some of the most interesting, the most soulful Pinot Noirs out of California for me. They were terrific. They weren't for everybody because they were so wild and woolly, but they were soulful to me. The first person that carried the Whitcraft Pinot Noirs in Hawaii was Kevin Toyama.
Wow.
Another winery that is a real favorite of mine. It's not one of the darlings. It's not one of the 98, 99 point wines out of Burgundy, but was Domaine Mom. So Domaine Mom was just a father and son, and it was just these earthy, rustic, they weren't correct all the time, but they had soul. And the first person that carried them on a wine list, it was at the Pacific Club, was Kevin Toyama. And I think was it the 82 vintage or the 83 vintage?
I believe it might have. No, I believe it was 82.
Yeah, 82 vintage. So just to give you some history.
Yeah.
I mean, so you can, those two wines are two of my favorites, as you know. I try to pop open one all the time. It was Kevin that championed that. It wasn't Richard, it was Kevin.
So, Uncle Kevin, what do you look for when you're selecting these wines? Like from back in the day to now, has it changed? Like, what do you look for when you're like, this is a good wine, we got to get this wine?
Oh gosh, that's an ever-changing, ever-moving target. But I think, back in my early days, it was sort of about purity and freshness. The fruit needed to be vibrant. But I think the one thing that remains true, just as Chuck was saying, I mean, the wines need to have soul. I mean, they, I read a lot of publications about things, but one of the things I don't see writers writing about how a wine is resonant, how it's vibrant, how it sort of has this energy. And a lot of wines are made correctly. And, Whitcraft wasn't, like Chuck mentioned, it was wild and woolly. It was vibrant. It was full of energy and personality.
It was alive, right? Yeah.
Exactly. You never knew when it would stop, in a sense. By the same token, Domaine Mom is like that. I mean, sometimes people, when they put their nose in the glass, even experienced tasters, they kind of like, they cock their head. Well, what is that? They think there's something wrong. And yeah, there's something wrong. It's got character. It's got soul. It's got personality. It's got all of those things that make it interesting. It's just sort of not the wine that you pick up and that you sort of just chug down. It requires thought. It provokes thought. And it keeps you coming back for more. That's the beautiful thing about wine.
Awesome.
Oh, so Kevin, so you, what were some of the early aha moment wines for you when you were working in our field or the still or that kind of things?
Well, gosh, Chuck, I mean, aha moments never stop. I mean, it's sort of like as you taste more wine, as you experience more food, this is this compendium of flavors and experiences. And I guess when you talk about the early moments, I mean, they're no different from the current moments.
Well, I'm going to get to that, but I mean, what were some of the wines that really, like, when you first had it, it just created a whole new horizon for you to explore, a whole new dimension to wine?
I think when you really think about things culturally, you're not brought up to drink things that are sort of like austere and dry and bitter in a sense. So dry wines didn't appeal to me as much. Fruitier wines, to some degree sweeter wines, sort of pulled me in a little early. And there were fantastic Rieslings. I mean, Riesling was highly underappreciated, but when you taste them, just because of their purity and their focus and the vibrancy of the wine. There are producers like Fritz Haag, in the Mosel, as well as J.J. Prum, another producer from the Mosel, and even the wines from Zilliken over in the Saar. I mean, these wines, they sang, they spoke, they had just this impact, but yet even through the sweetness, even through the fruitiness, it caught my attention. And I think those are some of the aha moments, And I was more of a white wine guy in the beginning, but as time went on, there were Cabernets, for example. Nowadays, these days, actually, I mean, I don't drink as much Cabernet, but I had an aha moment about 3 years ago. But the aha for red was, for example, Silver Oak, Napa Valley, 1982. There were other wines like that. And it's interesting because I've steered away from those wines over time. I didn't find them as appealing for me. I was looking for wines with more brightness, freshness, and balance. But, a couple of years ago, one of my longtime friends, customers who comes to the restaurant, they asked me the same question that you just asked me. They asked me, what were some of the aha wines? What were some of the wines that you liked? And I told them. A couple of weeks later, they brought those bottles. And so I had a chance to revisit them, nearly 30 years later. And, just when I thought that I didn't like Cabernet, here I was having 76 Jordan just like 2 or 3 years ago. And
which was their first vintage, by the way.
And the wine still sang. All of this time later, the wine still sang. There was, 82 Beaulieu Vineyards, George Latour Vineyard. Same thing. The wine was still alive, vibrant. It was chunky. I wasn't expecting that. There are a lot of wines like that. So which is why I say, Chuck, I mean, aha moments come and they go. And, where I thought back then that was it for red, and then it sort of fell off my radar, out of my sight. Here we are years later, and I'm like, wow, that's really interesting.
So the next big opportunity in terms of wines that I saw you after Arfield Wine Company was you were doing the wines at the Pacific Club. So at that point, what new things, you seem to reinvent yourself as you go to every new place, and you do different, you spread your wings into creating different kinds of wine niches.
Was that your first evolution with really defining your working the floor essence and strategy there?
I wouldn't say, I mean, it is an evolution. It is a process. I mean, after leaving Arfield and going to Onjin Kim's, Hanate.
Was that before the Pacific Club?
That was actually no. Pacific Club was next, but I was there more to support Marvin Chang at the time.
Oh, okay.
Marvin Chang was the lead, and there were different things that we did. I mean, there were certain wines I said to Marvin, we need to do this. So that was sort of that progression. Marvin had more of the say in terms of the direction of that particular program. I sort of like began to make my mark more as I moved on to Hanate, and then to the Ihilani Resort, and then going off.
Hanate was a restaurant. Anjim Kim used to be the chef at Bagwell's 2424. So I used to work with her. So she opened a restaurant in the same parking lot as Roy's. It's where Outback Steakhouse is in Hawaii Kai.
What was the style of cuisine?
Contemporary Japanese, I would say.
Japanese. Okay.
Yeah.
And what did you find paired well with that type of cooking?
At the time, lighter styled reds tended to work well. Riesling, of course, in the lighter, fruitier style, tended to sort of have that synergy that worked with Chef Onjin's cuisine. I mean, she's Korean, so there's definitely Japanese, French influence, Korean influences there. Sort of like that semi-Euro-Asian kind of style. But, most definitely brighter, fresher, not necessarily sweet or fruity.
Keeping it light on the palate kind of thing.
No, exactly. It wasn't really over-Oriental because she's cordon bleu trained.
Oh, okay.
So, her techniques of French were also like very classical, but to that she would add in a twist of Oriental. So it's very different than what Roy would do or some of these other Asian chefs. It was a different kind of food. And then after that, you went to Ihilani, I recall, next. And so you had this incredible wine list, incredible depth of verticals and whatnot. So what did you learn, or what made you reinvent yourself going into that particular job?
I was very fortunate. I mean, I managed to pass the level 3 exam for the Court of Master Sommeliers. And a lot of that was based on book work, going to the Hilani and working with a great cellar there. I mean, sort of the vision to have a fabulous wine list, 100,000, nearly $1 million cellar there. I mean, the tools were
$1 million.
there.
That's crazy.
When I got there, the inventory was $750,000. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Back then.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, I, without having to leave the island in a sense, I mean, I was able to sort of find my ground more or less, taste more of the classics in terms of from France, Italy, and, not too much in Spain, France, Italy, Germany, in the Southern Hemisphere. So I got to be deeper in terms of Bordeaux, going back to the 40s, 47, Cheval Blanc.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting because let me say this. So if you look at the wines that they bought from Dennis Overstreet in L.A., who was one of the big-time wine retailers in the country, he was the wine guy for all the movie stars and everything because he was L.A. I can't remember the name of his company now, but anyway, so one of the Japanese owner representatives bought like $500,000 worth of old Bordeaux, and it wasn't so much Burgundy as it was all Bordeaux. There was some white Burgundy, but not too much red Burgundy. It was mainly all Bordeaux, and all these old vintage, like 47 Cheval Blanc, one of the greatest wines ever made. Mm-hmm. And despite having all that to depth to work to create a wine list with, Kevin layered it so that those were just pieces on the wine list. They weren't the wine lists. They didn't define the wine list because he filled it out by doing ingenious ways of doing verticals of Tempier or Grange de Père or these other wines. So it was a well orchestrated wine list, really well put together, really well selected, so that it just didn't seem that you start off with $200 or $300 a bottle, for a wine. And for a fine dining restaurant, I think that says a lot. He made a very balanced and comprehensive breadth of selections that I think if you were a world-class diner or world-class traveler, like what Ihilani was looking for their clientele, he created the wine list that could satisfy this many people. I thought it was just genius, that wine list. Okay, so then we moved into, after Ihilani.
Well, I have a quick question because we have a lot of viewers who are just starting out on their wine journey, and there's a lot of questions resonate with how do I begin studying and how do I begin tasting? So you mentioned that this time at Ihilani was when you kind of hit the books or when you really started studying and tasting. What are some of your methods from back in the day that you used to first start out? Did you keep like a notebook with like all your tasting notes, or did you just read a bunch? What were some of your methods?
I mean, certainly reading a bunch is especially being in Hawaii. I mean, I think that's the key. I mean, back then there were great wine publications.
We didn't have the internet.
Exactly. It's not like GromSomm. GromSomm is such an incredible resource. I mean, the detail and information, how up to date is. It's phenomenal. So, back then it was more about magazines. So, we read whatever publications.
Magazines? Was that when Sante was pretty big?
Sante was just coming out back then.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Sante
I remember
and Savour. Those were the two magazines that were coming out at that time.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, Savour.
Oh, I remember Randy Caparosa on the cover. I saw an old picture.
You know that picture?
Yeah, I know that picture.
Oh, my God.
That's like an iconic photo, right?
But
were you ever on the cover?
No.
Oh.
I'm not a media darling like all the rest of these guys. I'm just, look at the way I dress. You think anybody wants to take a picture of me? Oh, no.
Maybe from the torso up, but not down below the shorts.
Oh, you need a white, no, I better not say. The thing I just want to impress upon you, Ariana, is that I think it takes a group.
Okay.
That's what I see happening in Hawaii right now. The formulation of a core group of people. That was his generation. There's the Mark Shishido, the Marvin Changs, the
David
Tim
Goldcross.
Learmonts. That's his generation. I mean, they did things together. They tasted wines together.
And they had fun, right?
Yeah, they had fun together, they were open. So they didn't know Chinon, or they didn't know or be able to taste, all these wines, whether it's a Silvaner or it's a Scheurebe or from Germany or something from Greece. So, but their group wanted to taste it together. So it was this bundle, and that can help with you guys on viewing this thing. You establish a wine tasting group where you guys all create a theme. You go to the store, everybody brings a bottle wrapped. You don't have to identify the wine, just share it, and everybody dissect it, just like how Ariana did on some of the blind tasting episodes here. And you just assess the wine blindly.
One of the kings of, you brought it up, blind tasting, is actually visiting Kevin, and I've seen him blind taste wine sometimes, and having me practice blind tasting with him. He's so acute. Like, he can get
He ain't cute.
He's one of the most precise tasters in the sense that Kevin can nail the vintage, which is always a really, really interesting task. But you also know parcels. Like, I feel like you're so specific with producers. How do you get to that level? Just practice?
I got some good advice once that, especially when I'm building a wine list, I mean, if you're going to have one producer Amarone, who is it going to be? If you're going to have one producer from the Northern Rhone, who is it going to be? So, you do your homework, you do your research, you look for the best producer. And by the same token, on the flip side, you look for producers that have value. I mean, the wine lists that I have worked with are deep, but at the same time, they're not meant to be a collection where it sort of sits there. Granted, to some degree, wine from the right producer from the right vintage grows in value. That's sort of redeeming in a way. But in the main sense, it's more about finding quality and value. Just basically a lot of research and finding who's the best, and looking at what is their technique, what is their style. Getting as much research in terms of looking at reviews, finding out what other people say, see if that agrees with you, find out that if certain reviewers have certain opinions about the style, that may not be what you're looking for.
Like, cross-reference is important too,
exactly,
right?
a lot. I mean, Bordeaux doesn't come here, but I have to buy Bordeaux. However, I do look at multiple resources to find out which is the best producer. And stylistically, I try to look at regional style to find out, is this what I enjoy? Is this what I like? Is this what I think my guests will like? How will the wine age? When I buy a wine based upon quality and based upon the producer's track record and the pedigree of the wine, so that I don't have to think too hard about if this wine just happens to sit with me for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, or even, heaven forbid, longer on a certain occasion. Will that wine fall apart?
Yeah.
There's this thing that we do that I learned a long time ago, where we would taste a bottle of wine and it feels fantastic. There's a certain amount of restraint. You put the bottle away, you don't taste it, or maybe you come back 3 days later, you taste it again. Is that still holding that same kind of energy and vibrancy? Yes. Take that sip, put it away, come back to it a week later, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, a month later, 2 months later.
Well, he has a Coravan, so.
Well, that's sort of cheating in a sense. I mean, I like to see how wines
evolve,
change with oxygen, because there's so much wine out there in the market, and there's so much marketing about wines, and most of those wines are over 90% is meant to take home, pull the cork, drink right away, and they're beautiful, they're enjoyable. It helps people brings people into the world of wine. But yet at the same time, there's other wines that come from a particular site, a country, a region, by a particular producer that has been doing it for generations, and you want to see what that sort of like where that comes from, that inspiration, that secret, that heritage, and what makes it so special. So I mean, there's multiple ways to do it. Just tasting.
You also recommended a really great Bordeaux book to me that went through all the different vintages, which I found helpful. Do you remember which book that was?
Oh, that might have been
Broadbent?
Michael Broadbent.
Michael
yeah.
Broadbent. That was a really helpful book too. Because these days it's hard to find some of these older vintages to taste yourself, but just having an idea of what the weather was like back then and how he perceives the wine to be tasting, that was a really helpful resource. So thank you for that.
That book, so I've tasted with Broadbent a few times, over the years. That book is kind of good in that it helps you
Get a
categorize
general,
wines.
yeah.
But, to me, again, when you play on a certain level of quality, certain producers, certain vineyards, every vintage is different. The growing season is completely different. And therefore, the results gives you a different snapshot of what that vineyard or what that winemaker wants to say. So to sit there and go, well, the 1974 was not so good, is not so good, generally speaking, or the 1972 Burgundies weren't that good. Well, they were. You just have to wait, and so, I think that you have to be careful with that kind of reference point. And I think, it's probably even more changed now because of the warming of the planet. We don't have too many really, really weak vintages like we had in the 70s, so the 60s, et cetera, It's generally warm enough to produce a quality trophy wine today nearly every year, maybe 8 or 9 vintages out of every 10. So the game has changed greatly, but I think you have to be careful, my point is, in vintage chart mentality.
Okay.
I think the point that Kevin is making that I totally agree with is you got to find who's the bullet.
Okay, the
in
gun.
the different price ranges. You got to find, and if you get there after they've been discovered, you're going to miss the boat. You're going to miss the boat in allocations. You're going to wait in line with everybody else. You're also going to pay more dollars for the wine. So you have to try to do your research and be proactive to find these products before they hit it. You understand what I'm saying? Nowadays, there's so many wine buyers. There's so many sommeliers looking for the hottest, latest new thing. You have to be proactive. And so for all of you, even as viewers, it's like, finding these progressive wine stores. Or as Ariana said on the Wine of the Week, she talked about Nyers. Go out and ask for it. That's what I did. When I was looking for wines, I went out and got them. I didn't wait for people to tell me about Krug or Henri Jaillet or Domaine Laflèvre. I bought Laflèvre back in the 70s. The 76 was the first vintage I bought Domaine Laflèvre. Now I can't even get a bottle of Domaine Laflèvre, at least for less than $150 a bottle. It's more like 200 something. So you have to rely on somebody that can advise you down this road instead of I like this wine or I don't like. If you have a buyer like that, I don't know if they're giving you the best options. They should be asking you questions about what's good, what's not good, how and why, and then you can make choices based upon what they're saying. But as you know, like Cully goes to talk to Keith Ito over at Arfield Kailua, and like you like to talk to Jason over at Fujioka's. Those guys are on top of the market. They can tell you what's happening, what's not happening. You got to find someone like that, just as you would a stockbroker, just as you would an investment banker. You got to find someone that you trust, but it's going to have knowledgeable enough to give you really viable choices. I think it's really important to establish that relationship, and rather than going shopping around to see who has the best price. Because if they turn their air conditioner off at night, to save money, I mean, how is that wine being stored at the right temperature? So there's always trade-off. I just as soon just try to hook up with someone that I trust and who's up on the trends and whatnot, and so that I can try these wines like that Mascaflero we tried at 15 something a bottle, or this Atelier Albarino that we're tasting right now. It took us so long to get this wine to Hawaii. And so it was only available on a couple retail shelves for just a short time, and it was gone.
Let's actually take a sip of. I've been sipping on it a little bit selfishly. So, you want to talk about this wine at all, Chuck?
Kevin, you talk about it. So, Kevin, just so you know, Raul Perez came to Hawaii for a little bit, and he hung out at the Halekulani Hotel. So, Kevin actually met him.
Wow.
Yeah, well, it was just by happenstance. I mean, he was out in our courtyard. I came up to him. I knew there was a wine event. He didn't speak any English. Of course, I didn't speak any Spanish, or very fragmented English from him. We talked briefly. Then I asked him, would you like to come and see the cellar? Just so I just told him to come with me, and he did. He saw our cellar, and he was like, oh, he was interested. We went back downstairs. He told me to wait. And he went and brought me a bottle of one of his wines from one of his Altria project.
Oh, nice.
And, this was back in, about 2005 maybe. And, since then, of course, he hasn't been back. But maybe about 2 years ago, I went to Vin Expo in New York, the first time they were having Vin Expo in the United States, which is, it's amazing to see all of those producers. And I ran into him again. His English has gotten a little better. He's grown a lot more hair, of course. And, he spoke a little more English, but of course, we kind of reconnected. And, hopefully he'll be back here in Hawaii someday. But his Albarino is fantastic. Los Alamos Albarino is made from vines that are, I believe was like about 150 years. Real spices, yes, 150 to 180. Yeah.
So they're pre-phylloxera.
Wow.
Which means,
That's
150 to 170 something years old, and they're own rooted.
So for our viewers, this wine comes from the Rias Baixas in Spain, specifically on that western Atlantic coast. And Rias Baixas is known for Albarino. But I need to say that I haven't had this wine before. I've had some Raul Perez, but I've never had his Albarino. And it's unlike any Albarino that I've ever had, in the sense that, yes, it does have, that citrus and really nice citrus blossom element, but it's funky in a really cool way. How would you describe it?
I mean, the first thing I do when I smell that glass, I haven't tasted this yet, but I brought it to my nose, maybe about 2 inches away, and the first thing I smelled was a lot of minerality, and I like that. I mean, it wasn't quite limestoney or chalky, but it was just very stony and minerally, not real dusty. But beneath that, you could smell all of sort of like that lemon and lime oil right beneath it, and it's just there's this underlying perfume. It's like a white flower, like a quince, quince jam, or it's just sort of got like those undercurrents, and
it's not tropical. It's not ripe and forward and tropical. That's the point. So just to add on to what you were saying about the wine, so these are all pre-phylloxera vines. It comes from 3 parcels. It's a joint venture between him and Rodri Mendez, who's like the top vineyard guy in all of Rias Baixas. And this is produced from 3 parcels, all pre-phylloxera vines. The soil is sand. So that's why, the phylloxera virus, the phylloxera bug don't like sand. So that's why it's still own rooted. In addition to that, sand is a meager soil. It doesn't have a lot of nutrients, and it also drains. So it creates a very different dynamic of minerality that limestone and other soils like that create. It's more gentle than limestone can be. In addition to that, each of these parcels are less than 1 kilometer from the ocean. So it's so darn cool that he can leave his grapes on the vine, 2 weeks, 3 weeks later than his neighbors, just because of how the close proximity to the cold airs from the ocean, And the thing about this thing, just so you understand, Albarino is the name of a grape. It's indigenous to Northwest Spain, I believe. It is, in my opinion, for me, it's the finest grape I've had indigenous to Spain. Some people say Verdejo and all these other grapes. Yeah, they're all good, but Albarino has magic. It oftentimes has a Riesling-esque nose in that you think it might have sweetness and it doesn't, but it's very mesmerizing, it's very striking, it's very captivating, and that's what Albarino offers. In addition to that, most of the 2 best versions I've had prior to this one were stainless steel fermented, and so therefore maximizing the freshness, the liveliness, the vivid, outgoing, uplifting character of what the grape can offer, But this one, so Raul Perez is one of those guys that is questioning trends and the warming of the planet and using stainless steel and all these different factors that many, many wineries are gravitating towards today. And he's taken an approach both in the vineyard and in the winery of going back to how his ancestors grew and produced the wines. So that's why this wine is old barrels. It's old, large barrels, 1,500, 2,500, in size. So very large barrels so that you don't get oakiness. You can get a creaminess to this wine. It rounds out the edges, which I like, but it's not tutti frutti stainless steel kind of vibrancy, which is it's not better or worse. It's just, this wine has more dimension to it, not only in aroma, but in texture. It has a very different mouthfeel just because of the roundness that these large oak barrels make. In addition to that, everybody's using stainless steel today. And, while I think it's a great vessel, it's probably the most efficient and most easiest to maintain vessel to ferment wines, you get a certain type of characteristic with it, even if you do some lees contact to it. So he's experimenting with more things like concrete and large barrel, large format, very large format barrels, just to ferment the wine without making it, so forward. There's some layering, there's some intricacies here.
I can totally
In addition
see
to that, the other things he's questioning is that, if you have to undergo malolactic fermentation, you might be growing the wrong grape in the wrong soil in the wrong climate. So he's suggesting malolactic fermentation, creating malic acid and doing a secondary fermentation. So green apple kind of acidity, unripe kind of acidity to more of a lactic, creamy acidity that is caused by a secondary fermentation. You create more mouthfeel. Well, if you have to undergo that, again, maybe you need to look at how you're growing your grapes. So that's why, you want more tartaric acidity or ripe acidity. So that's why less than a kilometer from the ocean. That's what that creates here. Or in Germany, he was talking about Germany. Typically pre-global warming, they were harvesting in October, November, where everybody else is harvesting August, September. So because of the longer hang time, you have more physiological maturity. So that's why German Rieslings in the old days tend to have high percentages of ripe tartaric acidity. So that's what he's suggesting, is that I need to examine things so that I can create. So like in Germany, before you would have southwest facing slopes, so you get maximum sun. You had the reflection off the river. Even the rooftops were slate, so you get reflection off of that. So you maximize the sunshine, because Germany would only ripen grapes 2 or 3 vintages out of every 10. So today, now that they have a ripe vintage, essentially every single vintage, shouldn't we slow things down and have north-facing slopes? These are the questions that people like Raul Perez is questioning. And can't we do it in a different way? So because of the warming of the planet, we need to think opposite of what we did before. And so he's one of those guys leading this charge. And I think this wine is a celebration of that. I think it epitomizes, rethinking, how we should do things both in the vineyard and the winery.
I totally agree. It's a out-of-the-box kind of wine, challenging. Let's think about things in a different way. And I'm really curious, Kevin, what are some of your thoughts in terms of food and wine pairings that this might work with?
Well, before I tell you that, I have something that I have to admit. I've recently bought cases of this wine for home consumption. That's how much I like it.
Oh, good. I love that.
So why couldn't you bring a bottle to share with us tonight, bro?
I drank it.
So we might have to do the same thing at our household too, because it's really scrumptious.
Yeah, you find something good that doesn't cost a lot.
How much was it? $25 in a store?
No, less.
How much?
Less.
Oh, wow.
I can't tell you everything, can I?
Hey, thanks for sharing, bro.
You can't reveal your whole hand, right?
I had to go out and barter to get this bottle of wine to showcase on this thing. The guy has cases at his home. He didn't volunteer anything to me. Hello?
So if I go and buy this wine and I bring it home, what should Michael cook then? Because I brought the wine.
Oh,
so.
I mean, especially being, Rias Baixas, so close to the ocean. I mean, it just sings seafood.
Seafood.
I was fortunate to be taken to Spain by Jorge Ordonez years ago. And one of the things about Jorge, as he shows you his portfolio of wines in every region, as he bus loads you around. This is called the Death March. For people in the wine industry, this is the most horrendous wine tour you could be in, because they load you on a bus.
It's like appointment heavy? Is that why? Or
oh no, it just goes.
It just goes.
Yeah, they get you on a bus at 5, 6 in the morning, and Spaniards they eat late. Dinner starts like after 10. So we would be up early in the bus.
You couldn't bring spamusubi in the backpack, no?
No, I couldn't. I didn't have my portable stove back then.
Okay.
But you go into Spain. The first place we went was a truck stop. I walked in a truck stop at all this food. There's literally hundreds of Serrano and Iberico hanging in the truck stop. You know,
Oh,
it's
cool.
really, it looks like potato chips all over the place, but they aren't. But in any case, this wine just absolutely, sings seafood. I mean, especially, of the more oily variety. I mean, you look at the smaller seafood, you can do sardines, you can do mackerel, you can do all of those beautiful oily fish. I mean, especially with the cuisine, where the cuisine is lighter, much more Mediterranean, where there's a sampling of more olive oils and herbs and such. It's a no-brainer. I mean,
Oh,
it's
okay.
absolutely seafood. I mean, yeah, I mean, the lighter and fresher, the better.
Very cool. It has that freshness on the nose, so it'd pair very well with something with herbs or something too, right?
This is one of those beautiful wines that, as light as it is and as pretty as it is, it's intriguing. It draws you back to the glass. You want that second taste. You want that you want to smell. What was that I just smelled? I mean, what is that aroma? Can you identify it? This is one of those big, intriguing, beguiling wines that just sort of like you just want to have more. Absolutely.
So, Kevin many years ago asked me, that I asked him what trends he's looking at. He earmarked Spain. I didn't get the wines from Spain, and specifically from Jorge. I thought a lot of the wines were very forward. And then after a while, like Winebow with Italy, they started doing all these other projects with good grapes and everything, and more of a cooperative type of mentality. I thought the wines were good and they were well priced. But the real interest for me in Spain became when Raul Perez came on the radar, because I think this guy is doing something very unique. He's not chasing Parker scores or doing Parkerized wines. They're the complete opposite. They're all about transparency, purity, balance, texture, etc. They may not be light and ethereal. This wine's not light. So I think that you talk about seafood, it's got to be a very rich extra virgin olive oil, or you got to have a little bit of butter, because this wine's got a little bit of bitterness and a little bit of tannins inside, so you have to make sure the fat content is high in your seafood. So and either or you use fatter seafood dishes like lobster or swordfish or things like that have more fattiness to the preparation. But Raul Perez is a game changer, and it took us 7 years to get the wines to Hawaii at least. So here you go, ladies and gentlemen, the Atelier. So Raul Perez has many different labels. I know he does partnerships with many different people, whether it's with different grape sources. He does a deal with the vineyard owners, or maybe a different wine like Castro Candas, which I saw on the shelf. I think it was Fujioka's, is one of his projects, and that's a joint venture between he and Antoine Graillot from the Rhone Valley of France. And so he's another hotshot winemaker. So you have this combo, this dynamic duo of Raul Perez and Antoine Graillot making a Menthia-based wine that's an indigenous red grape, and that thing was only like $23 in the store. So there is some Raul. He mentioned Utrea. I saw some Utrea at like 3 different stores. That's a Raul Perez wine.
It was only $18 at the store.
I know. So it's not
Deal.
super expensive, but don't expect something big and lavish and opulent. That's not Raul Perez. It's more about in search of balance, in search of appreciating heritage and indigenous and all those things. And, he's rethinking how he does things in the vineyard and the winery. So
important.
I think this guy is a game changer.
So
And-
For his reds in particular, though, they're a little different. They need time. So those are wines that if you don't quite get it when you open the bottle, you need to put it aside. You need to come back to it maybe tomorrow, maybe a couple of days later, because the wine changes. Wines like this that come from great vineyards, older vineyards, grown in the right soil, they don't always speak easily. Sometimes you need to give it a little bit of air, a little bit of space and
give
time.
it some room. Yeah. Okay, to breathe a little bit. So Spain seems like a really memorable trip. I also know, Kevin, that you traveled to Napa, kind of a lot because you think it's a very important site. Why do you love visiting Napa so much for you?
This past January, it's just because I couldn't go down to Paso with all the cool kids, so I had to go to Napa. But
Just Napa, casual.
But it was more because one of my coworkers, I try to venture out with other people that I work with and other people in the industry, and usually there's a little itinerary. And in this one, it was about coming back to Napa. It was about visiting different places. I mean, there's secondary auction markets and things. I visited those. I went back to some of the old guard. So
Who's the old guard?
Old Guard, the new Isley Vineyard or Arajo. I went up to Diamond,
wow.
the one at Diamond Creek. Dominus isn't necessarily Old Guard, but it was more about the older vineyards of Napa Valley, up to Harlan. Gosh, where else was that?
These are like vineyards that really put Napa on the map, I would say, right?
Well, they're some of the most collectibles.
Yeah.
That's the point. And Halekulani plays in that arena. Vino doesn't.
I also went to visit McDonald Vineyards. Alex McDonald, their family owns the Tokolan Vineyard from where some of the
Wow.
great Napa Cabernets.
No, they
were.
own a portion of it, a small portion. They have the smallest parcel.
And so we walked, we basically walked the vineyard with him. He told us about the old vines that they have, and he was sort of relaying the history and looking at things from their perspective in terms of their time within living within Napa Valley, that generational look.
Oh, that's awesome.
Did you stop by and see Bruce Nyers?
No, I didn't have time to go up to see him.
He had a full schedule. He was on that Spanish schedule in Napa.
I think he was
Let's
down
see.
in, I think
Tim
he was down in
McDonald,
Paso.
Harlan, or Bruce Nyers? Oh, I don't
Yeah,
know.
I think Bruce was over in Paso with all the cool kids.
Oh, Chuck's,
That's because Ariana was there. Everybody knows Ariana. We just came from a liquor store. There was 2 customers in there buying these cases of wine, and they're both telling me, that's the girl on the podcast, right? Even though she had a mask on. I was like, whoa, I know her. I knew her before she was famous.
It's because I was walking in with Chuck, and Chuck goes,
Yeah.
"Chuck's here, everybody."
Yeah,
so
I did not do that. I would never do that. But hey, she's famous, bro.
no. Well, speaking of cool relationships and people that you meet, you had a really cool relationship with Paul First, right? Where you got to meet him.
Can I tell that story?
Go ahead.
So you know who was one of the first guys to bring First to carried in the United States, right? And so I've been a huge First fan. You know he
The
made
answer is him, by the way, in case you didn't get
you
that.
know he made a special cuvee for us, right, for our restaurants, whatnot. And so they're coming to Hawaii for the Hawaii Food and Wine Festival. So I look up on their website to brush up on some of their vineyards, make sure that they don't have new vineyards and everything. And on the cover, the front page of the website, there is a quote by Kevin Toyama, not Chuck Furuya. There is a quote from Kevin Toyama, Halekulani Hotel, and he talks about the first wines and the Pinot Noir. They didn't ask me. That's all I want to say right now.
So, Kevin, from your side, what made First Wines really special for you and create that wanting to, have their wines on your list?
The wines from First have always been very riveting to me. I mean, just their purity and elegance. But, I never thought that Pinot Noir or Spätburgunder, as they called it, from Germany, could be that intriguing. Contrary to what we in America believe is Pinot Noir, where it's very, fruity, upfront, jammy, and just sort of like so attractive perfume and appealing. The wines from Germany tend to be much more austere. They're softer spoken. They have that minerality and texture. But when you taste the wines and you look past the fact that there isn't as much fruit as I'm accustomed to, and you taste the earth, the spice, and the terroir, the thing that I saw behind it was this finish is long. Even behind all of this, I can taste the finish on that Pinot. I'm like, my God, how did they do this? I mean, and one of the things as a wine taster that, especially being in this business for so long, you don't appreciate right away. But as time goes on, you start to understand that acidity, tannin, those are sort of like, those add tension to a wine. They are sort of like the backbone, the preservative. Great acidity, great soils tend to preserve wines. And when you've got this much terroir holding it back, but yet you taste the finish, it's like there's a piece of the puzzle missing. The clues are all there if you're willing to listen to it, but the tannin is holding back, or the minerality is holding back something. What is it holding back? I said, there's a lot of stuff in behind there, because the finish on the back end is telling me something's there. And so, I went all in. I mean, on his wines, I went all in. I thought they were fantastic and rewarding. We go back in our cellar at the Halekulani to 2005 right now for
That's amazing.
some of his older vintages. And whenever you open a wine, it's interesting. They're savory, but yet this fruit, this sort of these flavors emerge that you would not suspect to be there. When you think German Pinot Noir, you kind of scratch your head, but once you try them, you begin to understand.
And I think for our viewer, the first FURST can be found at some wine stores. They have the Tradition available.
That's the point. Just to clue you in
sorry,
there.
I didn't realize we were so popular over here, guys.
First makes like many different white wines, specifically Riesling, Müller-Thurgau, and the other one he makes is Müller-Thurgau, Riesling, and there's one more. White grapes, Pinot Blanc. And I saw the Müller-Thurgau at 3 different stores, including Fujioka's Arfield Wine Company in Kailua, and I think it was Arfield Wine Company in Aina Haina. So he does make wine. So whether it's Pinot or whether it's white wines, his wines really are about purity and precision, finesse. They're not belligerent, they're not opulent, they're not obvious. So you have to, again, game-changing wines that's going to open a whole new horizon for you to explore. Of course, this Atelier Albarino is one. But the Paul First wines you should check out. Now, on the Pinot Noir, don't expecting, I was looking at the latest Wine Spectator. My granddaughter handed me this magazine this morning or yesterday morning, and it was the current issue of the Wine Spectator that my wife just recently got. And I was looking at all the award-winning Pinot Noirs on there, and it's all these big oaky things, these extravagantly, ripe and luscious and everything. That's cool. That's not Paul First. Paul First is intricacy. It's nuance. It's finesse. It's purity of minerality. It's just wonderful texture, effortlessly light on the palate. So for those of you that are looking for something that's going to slug your palate or slap you, that's not Paul First, whether it's white or red. So, reach for a bottle. She mentioned, I think at Tamura's was the Tradition.
I think I
Fujioka's. Yeah, Fujioka's, I saw it there. Is the Tradition. That's their entry-level Pinot. Their 2 entry-level Pinot is the Tradition, and the other one is Freuburgunder, which is a mutation of Pinot Noir. That's their 2 entry-level Pinots. And after that, they have some Grand Cru single vineyard stuff and maybe a couple village wines. But they're definitely worth checking out. They are world-class, and they provide a whole nother world for you to explore.
I would say something similar between both this wine, when we're talking about the first, and what I feel like maybe both of you, correct me if I'm wrong, like to seek out is very purposeful winemaking, where the wine is made to show the vineyard and show a sense of place purposefully, right? Not something just for the sake of making wine, correct?
Oh, absolutely. It's about the purity of the grape, the vineyard. And, that Müller-Thurgau is fantastic. For Vietnamese cuisine, Thai cuisine, to some Asian cuisines. Here at the Halekulani and Orchids, our chef de cuisine Christian is Italian, and it works well with his Mediterranean.
It does work with
cuisine.
the Mediterranean foods.
That's cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing about it is that Müller-Thurgau, he only has 3/4 of a hectare. That's it. So there's not a lot of it, but we're fortunate to get quite a bit of it to Hawaii. So it's priced in the $23 to $25 a bottle. I think it's well worth seeking for all kinds of foods at your restaurant. I guarantee you, in 2003, 2 big magazines in Europe is Michelin, and the other one's called Gomio. In 2003, he was Gomio Winemaker of the Year. It's the highest accolade that you can get. So I guarantee you his wines are available at all the Michelin 3 stars, et cetera, because he's that.
That's first.
I mean, him and Perez, they're 2 of the
Kevin
top.
Toyama's words were on First website.
Exactly.
It was just a coincidence.
Serendipitous.
Yeah.
I love that.
Paul First is, I was there the last time I was there was in 2012, and I was watching the Pinot Noir. They were picking it grape by grape, and on the grape there was this little stem at the end, and that was their stem inclusion. They just left a little
intricate
thing
they
like
are.
this on top, and then they included that. That was their stem inclusion when they were making their Pinot Noir in 2012, or maybe it was 14, whatever. You get the idea. This guy is about minute detail when he mixes wines.
When I went to Germany, First Estate was the very first winery that we went to.
It was the first wine?
It was the first winery that we went to.
On purpose.
And,
I'm appalled.
We're sitting there. Yes, Paul was there also. I was sitting there, and like wine geeks do or wine people do. You have a collection of bottles sitting on that ledge or that little ledge above your doorway. So when I looked up there, I took a picture because this guy has an interesting mind. I mean, there were, of course, great German wines, great wines from the Rhone and Burgundy. There was a bottle of 1885 Domaine de la Romanée-Conti.
What? Wow.
1885.
It was like 1885. I was like,
crazy.
what? That is so...
Chuck, were you born around then? What is that?
Just to let you know, Ariana, they have schools that can help you develop a sense of humor. It can really help you, really.
Yeah.
Do they have an accelerated course?
Yeah, both of you guys need help in that area. But, the thing that's really interesting about Paul First, so he is very precise. Everything has to be perfectly clean. This bottle, he's like Courtney. This bottle has to be like exactly like this. And all. I mean, he's just very specific about what he wants. So imagine me taking him and Olivier Humbrecht from Germany golfing.
What?
At the Manalani. The three of us and one other person were golfing together.
And who
Paul
shot
First,
best?
Paul First never golfed before, and neither did Olivier. Two of the greatest winemakers in the world, one from France, one from Germany. And we're golfing at the Manalani barefoot.
What?
You can imagine how his face was so red because he kept missing the ball when he was swinging. Oh, God, that was a memory for me.
Why did you do that to them?
Because we're in Hawaii,
okay,
so we were doing an
okay.
event called Cuisines of the Sun. So I had invited each of them, and it's really interesting because from that trip, that's how we got the CF Müller-Thurgau made for us, and for the Halekulani Hotel. That's why I think it was 97. We had one barrel made for the 100% Chardonnay from the Clos Vinsboul vineyard, which is one of Olivier Humbrecht, who's one of the greatest winemakers in all of the whole world. And Clos Vinsboul was always the highest scoring wine, that vineyard, no matter what grape it was. So we were able to get Chardonnay from that vineyard, 1 barrel's worth, specifically for the Halekulani's wine. That was pretty cool. That was pretty
That's
cool
pretty
cash,
We actually still have one bottle at that left that'll never be opened.
Wow.
Back then, Clos Vinsboul was getting 100 points.
Yeah, they were.
The Pinot Gris or whatever he made from that. So it was a historic thing for us to carve 1 barrel out for the Halekulani. That was pretty
That's
cool.
amazing. Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah, that was
So I have a question, just kind of thinking about, you obviously have a long and intricate history with wine in Hawaii, but what is your wish, Kevin, for us, the new generation? What do you hope that we can continue in this legacy of Hawaii food and wine hospitality?
Well, gosh, the legacy. I mean, when you look at the Court of Master Sommeliers, it was more or less established for the American chapters to sort of broaden its reach, but at the same time to sort of expand upon things like mentorship. I think there are a lot of things that we did in our generation, of course, with the help of Chuck, with the help of Richard Dean, Master Sommeliers here in Hawaii, Roberto, of course, and now with Patrick. And, we want to continue that mentorship and sort of like give our experiences so that you can learn and grow from them and not sort of be enamored by sort of like the business of wine where wines,
The jargon, yeah.
the wines are so marketed where it's all about this many points at this score. Sometimes the best wines, the most insightful, the most soulful wines aren't the wines that get 90 plus points. They're the wines that sort of hover in that sweet spot between, like 85 and 89, and a lot of that depends upon what you read. These days I tend to read publications like Wine and Spirits Magazine. They do some insights into the different wineries. I like to read Decanter as sort of like the reference point for Europe and Britain, though our tastes are different. It's still an interesting reference point. I also like The World of Fine Wine. It's pretty expensive. It's like $45 for a coffee table type magazine, but the depth of information and articles written by professionals is, amazing. I think just, what I hope is that everyone becomes better balanced and not so attracted to the glitz and glamour of being in the wine industry and of course what involves wine. It's I think I'd like to say that even though I passed the advanced certification in '93, I don't really think I was advanced certified till maybe early 2000.
Oh, wow.
I felt like I still had to earn my chops. I felt like there was still a lot of things I needed to learn, and especially here in Hawaii, where there aren't that many fine dining venues. I always used to have this joke with purveyors and importers. I say I fly for wine. If you have producers coming out, and you've got a big tasting, I'll fly there.
Wow.
Because I want to learn more. I want to do more. Things like that.
I would say to take from that too is that we, obviously when everything is safe and opened up, we should definitely get out there and start visiting some of these regions. It sounds
Can I
like
go to Paso with you? Please.
you gotta ask the Queen Bee over here for an invite. Apparently, I didn't realize he was being exclusive.
Excluded. I'm a has-been.
Oh, watch
That's
out.
well documented. Where would you like to go next? What wine growing region?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. I mean, I'd like to see what's going on in Australia, especially the cooler reaches of Australia. I think
Like Tasmania too?
yeah,
Okay.
they're starting to shed that big alcoholic kind of style of wines. They're looking for a little more elegance. I mean, it's an old continent, and some of the vines have been there for long, so there's a possibility there's some interesting things there. I think we'd still have to sort of like sift through most of it. I think there'll probably be a few gems, a few pearls of wisdom here and there. But I also find South Africa interesting.
Oh, cool. Okay. We'll have to venture more into South African wines too.
Okay, one last question here, and then we need to. Kevin's got to go home and get his beauty sleep.
I need
Believe
a
me,
nap.
he needs centuries.
Siesta.
But
Am I getting grouchy?
for the viewer, I always ask this of people, what two California Chardonnays should I look for, regardless of price? Which two to you is something that you would want people to try? And I would ask you on the same time of two California Reds. So,
gosh, California whites.
because we talked about European, I just want to make sure we talk a little bit about California. So name me two Chardonnays out of California, two producers that I should or the viewer should check out.
That's a tough one.
Okay, Ariana, you warm them up. Give one.
I know we're going to talk about ABC later, so Aubon Clément, and I talked about Nyers. I think they have a cool variety going from the, stainless steel Chardonnay, stuff with oak too. I'd be remiss if I didn't say Ancient Peaks is a great Chardonnay as well.
Okay, Kevin, white wine. Doesn't have to be Chardonnay.
Doesn't have to be Chardonnay. Well,
Oh, it can be. I mean,
well, actually, for California, I'm being drawn more to Lodi these days.
Oh, cool.
Old vineyards.
for white.
For more for red than for white.
Okay, for white first.
Ooh, still not too much on my radar for wine. Sorry to disappoint.
Okay, for red wine.
But red from the Lodi, I think Randy Caparoso is publishing a Lodi book, so we should all be on the lookout for that. What should we be interested in the Lodi?
Randy lives in Lodi. So
Yeah,
of
he's
course-
got all the notes.
So there's a story. Maybe about 5 years ago, Randy Caparoso sends me an email when he was working with,
Somm
the
Journal.
Somm Journal. And he had sent me invites to wine tours before to Santa Cruz, Yorkville Highlands, Sonoma Mountain, not Sonoma, but yeah. Anyway, so he sends me an invite to
Sonoma Coast.
to Lodi. Yeah, Sonoma Coast. He sends me an invite to Lodi. I'm like, on my computer, I'm gonna say no. Then I'm like, my finger stops, and I'm like, this is Randy Caparoso inviting me to Lodi. I'm like, yes, I'm going.
Yes.
Did you go?
I went.
Wow.
You know what's so funny? I really wanted to go on that trip because I think I've been wanting to go to Lodi for 7-8 years now. I think there's huge potential out there, and it's really starting to happen. I'm already too late to go out there because it's already been discovered. But Lodi has so much potential. Even though it's flat, it's super hot. I mean, there's vineyards that are multi-generationally owned. So you have old vines, and you also have no mortgage affecting the cost of the bottle. So Lodi is totally worth checking out right now.
Yeah, I'm pouring a Grenache from Lodi, from Macaslas, from the Beckhold Vineyard, which is like a
cool.
100-year-old vineyard. There is Tegan Pasalacqua from Turley.
Nice.
He actually has a winery down there called Sandlands, and you absolutely cannot get anyone to respond from that. But it's on my list of things to do. I mean, he's working with what was it, Beckholt, and that Beckholt I think was like 120-year-old vineyard, farm to Sinso. So the white Zinfandel.
I think Turley bought that vineyard or leased
They
that
did?
vineyard.
Yeah. The white Zinfandel boom of the 80s sort of helped to preserve a lot of what's going down in Lodi. I mean, a lot of places replanted the Zinfandel. There were some holdouts down in Lodi, and some of those old vineyards got to be preserved. And here we are now.
And own rooted
Yeah, own rooted, exactly.
because it's sand.
Yeah, I think Beckholt was the one that it's sort of interesting where, because of the soils and how deep they are, there's this thing where it floods once a year, and the water soaks up all of the water into the deep soils, and they dry farm it from. They never irrigated. The water that comes through that one particular point in time is enough to soak the soils and to sort of like to keep those vines propagated and producing some fantastic fruit.
So the three
awesome.
prominent people out there right now is Pasa Aqua Tegan from Turley. I mean, he and his own label Sandlands. He's a big champion. There's also what's his name from Morgan Twain Peterson from what's that winery you like?
Bedrock?
Bedrock.
Yeah.
Bedrock Corporation, and Tadeo is huge out there. Tadeo's best friends with all these guys.
Yeah.
So Tadeo from the winemaker Nyers, and he has his own label Camino. He's big into this whole area right now, and that's the right people. That's the right people to be champion in this whole appellation. So I think we've gone over our time. I just want to say to you, Kevin, thank you for joining us for this
Mahalo.
podcast.
Thank you for having me. Chuck,
Words of
Ariana.
wisdom.
Ariana,
I've been here.
hello.
Hi.
Should I say thank you? Thank you, Ariana. You're such a special
Where's my
addition.
coffee?
And to all of you, thank you for viewing. We hope you tune in next time. Until then, aloha.
Aloha.
Thank you.
Mahalo.